Welcome to my next RPG in a Box video tutorial series. In this series, we're going to continue on from the scripting series, which I did a while ago. And this is aimed at people who are just starting out with both RPG in a Box, but also scripting. If this is your first game that you're ever coding for, then you're going to want to know how to program games. So that's what this series is going to aim to help with. Now, if you're a complete beginner and you've never programmed a game before, then I do suggest that you do check out my first scripting series, which I did a while back. The link will be in the description of this video. Although it doesn't cover anything practically, i.e. you won't actually make anything, those videos are really useful because they'll give you the foundational knowledge, which will just help you learn how to code much faster because you'll understand things a bit better. That being said, in this series, I'm going to explain some game design scripting, some game logic that you'll be able to use in your own games. And I'll also explain some of the basics as well. So in this first video, what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about how RPG in a Box actually works in terms of how you actually make a game function in RPG in a Box. Because it's very different to other engines like Unity or Unreal or C++ or something like that, which isn't even an engine, it's just a programming language. In those sort of environments, you would write your whole game pretty much in the code, and you would have one long, big code file which would have all of the code for your game. In RPG in a Box, it works very differently. RPG in a Box is an event-driven engine. So what you do is you write a series of scripts and you assign them to different events. And that's what makes your games work. So it's a two-step process. You write a script and then you assign that script to an event. If there isn't an event, you can't assign a script. Okay? So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to talk about what all the different events are that you can assign scripts to. And I'll briefly explain what each event is for to give you an idea of how you might use it. Okay? So the first one we'll go into is probably the most important one when you're starting out, is if you go into the game configuration section of the software and go to the General tab on the left-hand list, you should see a Startup Script section. This is the startup event. This event is basically triggered every time you start your game. So when you boot into a main menu, so if I show, for example, the main menu, typically it would look like this by default. You'd click New Game, and then you want your game to load. In order for your game to load, you need to have a startup script. Now, it doesn't need to be called startup. You can call it anything you want. You'll go into the script editor, you'll make a script. As I said, it doesn't have to be called startup, but you can call it that, of course. And the very least this script will need to have is a load map node in it. If you're using the Visual Script Editor, you'll drag a load map node in, and as long as you've created a map in the map editor, you can set your map in the map section, choose your player starting coordinate. So for example, you might say I want to start here, so you can click on the tile, right click, copy the coordinates, and then paste those coordinates into there like that. And then if you want to, you can change set the direction that the player character faces when you start the map. But the point is, this is your typical startup script. Now, if you're creating a bare bones project, or a blank project, sorry, so if I exit for a moment to the game manager and we create a new game, if you select this option, you'll have to create everything from scratch, which means you will not have a startup script, okay? If you select the bare bones project, you'll have a few things already in place, like a map, some tiles, a player character, and a startup script, and it will already be assigned. So when you click New Game, it will just load. However, if you're starting completely from scratch, then you'll have no startup script, no player character, no map, no tiles, anything like that. So if that's the case, then obviously, as I say, you need to create this file. It would be called anything you want. The very least it needs to have is a load map. Otherwise, it's not going to load a map and the game's not going to do anything. And then that goes into your game configuration startup script event. And this event is basically when your game starts, run this script. Okay, so that's the first event we need to mention, is the startup event, and that is triggered whenever you click New Game on your main menu. If you don't have a main menu, because you can disable it, if you go to User Interface and turn this off, if you turn that off, then the startup script will run the moment you run your game. It will just skip the main menu and load straight into your first map. Okay, so again, you'll need a startup script to do that. So you still need to set the startup script here, but if you have a main menu, then this will be run the moment you click New Game. If you don't have a main menu, this will run straight away. Okay, the moment you execute the game. So that's the startup event. If we now go to the Global Event Scripts tab along the very top, we have quite a list of other events here, and each of these events can be assigned a script, just like the startups event earlier. Now, I've only got one script in this project, so I could only assign startup to each and every one of these, which obviously I'm not going to do. The point isn't right now to actually assign any scripts to these. It's just to explain what these events are and what they do. So before I go into each and every one of these events, let me just reiterate that this is how RPG in a Box works. It has all of these events that you can see listed here, and there are more. We'll go over them all in a minute. But it has all of these events here, and these events are hard-coded. These are provided to you by Justin, the developer of RPG in a Box, for you to assign scripts to. Now, it's important to note that these events will always trigger regardless of if you have a script assigned to them or not. So these events are always being triggered by the engine itself, but if you don't have a script assigned, then nothing really happens in those events, but the engine is still listening for them so that it can trigger a script if you have it assigned. Okay, so it's just important to note that these are unchangeable and they will always silently trigger if there isn't a script assigned, or visibly trigger if you have a script assigned. Okay, let's go over each and every of these just so you understand what they're for, okay, and what they mean. So cursor target changes basically means every time your mouse cursor in-game hovers over a different target. So if we were imagine we were in-game, for example, not in the map editor, but actually in our game, this cursor here that I'm using at the moment, currently it's hovering over this dirt path. If I was to move the cursor off the dirt path onto the grass, that would be considered now a different target, because I've gone from what it was on before to hovering over something different. The moment you hover over something different, that's when this event is triggered. Okay, and if you have a script assigned to that event, then your script will be triggered. So if you wanted a message, for example, to show up every time you hover over a different object, then you would put a script with a message in it, and you would place that script on the cursor target changes event. So now, the moment I move this cursor from the dirt path to the grass, my message will pop up. If I then move it from the grass to the wall, the message will pop up. If I move it from the wall back to the dirt path, the message will pop up. It's basically every time the cursor target changes. Now, you can refine that in your script to filter out certain targets. So, for example, if you only want your message to appear when you hover over grass, then you would have your script check what the new target is and only react when it's a certain target. But just understand that even if you do that, this event is still always triggering. It's just that unless the target is the right one, your script won't actually do anything until it's the right target, if you filter it that way. Otherwise, by default, it's every time a cursor target changes. And that's the same for all of these. All of these will be triggering every time the conditions for their event are met. So the next one is camera direction changes. So that's every time you spin the camera around in-game and it changes to a different direction. So here, for example, we can see the camera is currently facing north, okay? But if I rotate it, now it says it's facing west. That would be a camera direction changes event. In-game, that would have registered as a camera direction change. And if I had a script in that moment doing something like spawning a creature or showing a message, again, now would be when that would happen. And if I was to spin around again, it's gone from west to south, that would be another trigger of the same event. And that script would run again. And it would trigger again because it's gone from south to east. And every time you change the direction, it's going to be re-triggering that script because it's re-triggering that event, okay? So that's what that one means. Player character levels up should be pretty self-explanatory. It's every time in-game your player character reaches a new level, if you have levels enabled. Every time they level up, this event is triggered. And if you have a script on that event, that script will be triggered. Player is defeated. Again, should be pretty self-explanatory. Every time the player character dies, loses all their hit points, that event is triggered. And if you've got a script assigned to that event, your script will trigger and do what you want your game to do in that moment. Character's health changes is whenever a character, not just a player, notice how it's generic. These ones are related to the player because they specifically say player character levels up, player is defeated. Whenever you see character's health changes, that means any character, including the player. So you would have to specify if you want a specific character, otherwise it's just going to register for any time any character, okay? So in this case, anytime any character's health changes, and that can be positive or negative. So for example, if a character's got 50 hit points and it goes down to 20, that would be a health change. If they've got 50 health HP and it goes up to 100, that would be a health change. So it doesn't matter whether it's going up or down. If any character's health in a specific moment changes, that would trigger this event. And if you have a script assigned to that event, that's when that script will trigger. And it will repeatedly trigger every time any character's health changes. Character enters a tile. This is any time any character enters any tile. So these three, enters, stops on, and exits a tile. We may as well discuss all of these right now because they're all connected. These all relate to the tiles that you have on your map, okay? The ones that you walk around on. Enters tile, if we just select one, this tile here, for example, enters happens immediately the moment your character enters this tile. So the moment they immediately cross from this one into here, straight away that would be an enters tile event. Exits tile is triggered anytime the moment they leave. So if they've just stepped, as soon as they step off of this edge and onto the beginning of this next one, that would be the exits tile event for this tile. Stops on tile is when you are within the tile and you stop moving. Now in grid movement, that would typically be the white center dot of the tile. If it does, I'm not sure if it works in free movement, I haven't tested it, but if it does, then presumably it can be wherever you stop. If it doesn't work, then it's because it's a grid-only event. But certainly enters and exits do work in free movement as well. But it's important to point out that these three events here are for every tile on the map. So anytime any character enters any tile. So if you have a script on this event, this script is going to be triggered every time any character steps on a tile, basically. So if you had a script, for example, that was going to show a pop-up message, and you had a load of NPCs walking around your map, every time an NPC moves to a different square, you're going to have pop-up messages left, right, and center. So just be aware that these are triggering anytime any character enters any tile, so almost all the time. So in order for your scripts to be useful for these events, chances are you're going to want to filter who's the character and sometimes even which tile. However, when it comes to things like that, there's a better way of doing that, which we'll get to in a bit. But I just want to explain what these tiles are and what they're for. Character is damaged. This is different to character's health changes. Character is damaged is specifically, have they been hit with an attack or have they been damaged by the damage entity function? Okay, just to explain what I mean by that, in the script editor, there's a function called damage entity. So you could script an entity to actually take damage. So if you use that, that would trigger the character is damaged events because they've just taken damage. This is more generic. This is just any time a health changes. So if you said, for example, take this character's hit points and deduct 10 from them in a script, that wouldn't be a damage event. That would be a health changes event. So if you had a script assigned to damaged, it wouldn't trigger in that moment because the engine wouldn't see that as a damaged event. It would see that as a health change event. However, if you actually attacked an NPC, or if you wanted to script the damage and you wanted it to trigger your damaged event, you, instead of telling the character's HP to go down by 10, you would pass in the damage entity function instead and damage them for 10. And then that would trigger the character's damaged event. So it's very specific, okay? But again, that's any time any character takes any kind of damage, this will be triggered. Object is grabbed, object is pushed, object is released. These are all related to pushable and pullable objects in the thingies system that you can set an object to be. This is basically any time any object is grabbed, that's an event, and you can assign a script to that event. Anytime any object is pushed would be an event. That would trigger the script. Anytime any pushable object that's been grabbed is released is an event. And that would also, if you assign it a script, that will trigger your script. Tool item changes. If you're familiar with RPG in a Box, then you'll probably know what tools are. If you don't, they're essentially a type of item that you can make in the items editor. You can make things called tools, and they're kind of like, pickaxes and hammers, that kind of thing. Typically, they're an item that you would interact with an object with and have it do some things. Like, for example, interact with a rock with a pickaxe tool and have it, chip it away or something like that. So this event is basically any time you change your tool item. So if you go from a pickaxe to a hammer or to an axe or something, that would be the item changing. So every time you change the item, that would be an event. And if you assigned a script to that event, it would trigger your script every time you change the tool item. So if you change from a pickaxe to a hammer, it would run your script. If you then change from the hammer back to a pickaxe, it would run your script. Every time you change your tool item, this event is re-triggered. Okay. The last three are obviously to do with quests: quest given, quest completed, quest failed. But these are to do with any quest. Again, everything in the global event scripts is very generic, just game wide. So this is anytime any quest is given, anytime any quest is completed, and anytime any quest is failed. These events will always be triggered. Doesn't matter what the quest is. If you've been given a quest, this event will run. If you've completed a quest, this event will run. If you fail a quest, this event will run anytime. Okay. And again, if you have scripts assigned to those events, they will trigger. Okay. So those are the global events scripts, and they can be very useful. The next events we have are the input bindings. And these are basically key press events. So you have all your key presses down the side. So like the W, S, A, D is your move up, down, left, right. Now these are how you can change the in-game controls. Be mindful that whether you're making a free movement game or a grid movement game, you'll need to make sure you're using the right key set for the type of game you're making. So if you're making a grid movement game, ensure that this says grid movement when you change the keys. And likewise, if you're making a free movement game, make sure this says free movement when you're changing the keys. Because if you're making a free movement game, but this is on grid, and you add a key that does something, when you play your game, that key won't do anything because you've made it for grid, you haven't made it for free movement. So make sure you're set to the right movement scheme for your project, and then you can add and change the keys that are set for that project here. So putting this back to grid for a moment. So obviously we can change these. So W can be move up, or it can be open the inventory, attack, climb up, that kind of thing. But what you can also do is add your own keys. So I'll just do add binding, and then ask you to press a key. So if I say L, okay. And then one of the events that you can assign a key, and any of these as well, you can do the same for the ones that have been pre-existing. But you can say run script. And then here is where you would then assign the script, if whichever script you've written. And that's how you can make key presses do things. So if I wanted my L key every time I press it to show a message, I would go to the Input Bindings tab, make sure I'm on the right movement scheme for my game, add the key L or whatever, make sure the events the action that it's assigned is run script, and then assign my script. And now every time I press L, that's a key press event, and that will run my script. Okay? So those are input bindings. Next, we have tile events. So every tile can have an event as well. So in the map editor, when you place your tiles, if you select one and go to the Entity Properties panel to the left-hand side of the map editor and scroll down, you should see a section called Scripts. If we expand this down, we have a trigger event section, and here we have some more trigger events, and these are trigger events that you can place on specific tiles. Now notice how the first 3 of these are almost identical to the ones we saw earlier in the global events section. We have any character enters tile, any character stops on tile, any character exits tile. However, there's a fundamental difference between these 3 options here and the ones we saw previously in the global events. The ones in the global events are for any and all tiles. These 3 events are for this one. So just to be clear, if you go into the game configuration panel and go to global event scripts and you leave these 3 blank, i.e. none, but you go to this tile and you put a script, for example, on enters tile, you can write a quick script, or you can assign one you've made in the Visual Script Editor. But now that I've assigned a script to this tile's enters tile event, all my characters that might be walking around the map are not going to trigger anything. The only time something's going to happen is when any character enters this specific tile, okay? So for example, if you wanted to make a trap, touch plate trap or something, then you would select the tile that should trigger the trap, and you'd have an enters tile event with your script that triggers the trap, or, plays the trap, the animation or whatever of the trap. That would be how you would use this event. And the same with stops on tile. It's this specific tile. Whenever any character stops on this specific tile, and anytime any character leaves this specific tile. Okay? It should also be pointed out these events can be stacked. So in other words, if I go back to enters tile, you'll see how my startup script is still assigned. But if I go to a different event like exits tile, I can assign, for example, a quick script, okay? And I can have these 2 events. I'm not overwriting the script. I'm just changing the event. So enters tile is using my startup script. Exits tile is using my quick script, okay? So this isn't a either or. This is a, do you want anything on the enters tile event? And also, do you want anything on the exits tile event? So just understand that, that's how you assign scripts to these different events. You just change the event in the trigger event section and then assign the script to that event, okay? And it will save it even if you change the event to a different one, okay? I don't want the quick script on that, and I don't need my startup on that. So next we have character interacts. So this means that in-game your character, the player character clicks on or presses the interact key on this tile. If it has an interact event, that will be triggered in that moment, and your script, if it's assigned to that event, will be triggered. So you can make this tile interactable. So it might be, for example, you open a door, you interact with it and the door opens. And then finally in this section we have the object enters tile, stops on tile, exits tile. These are for pushable and pullable objects, and it should be self-explanatory. As soon as a pushable object enters this specific tile, a script is triggered if you wish, or if you stop pushing the object on this tile, a script will trigger, or the moment you push a pushable object off of this tile, a script will trigger. Okay, so for example, if you wanted to make the destination for a pushable object, you would use stops on tile, and then when you push the object and then it stops when you've finished moving it and you give it some time to actually stop on this tile, it can run a script that says, updates a quest or something that says you've pushed the object onto the right square or something like that, right? That sort of thing. So those are the trigger events that you have for tiles, and that's how you can use those. Next, we have objects. Objects can also have scripts assigned to them. So let's place a crate down, for example. We select this crate. We have some trigger events here, only a couple, but they're useful. Character interacts is the same as the tiles one, but this time it's for an object. So this, for example, could be you might interact with it to break it or something like that. So you might have a character interacts event with a script that plays a broken animation or something for this box, this crate. And that would happen when you interact with this crate. It will have that event and then your script will trigger. Collides is to do with the collision meshes of both the player and, in this case, the object. So as soon as the two collision meshes collide, the collision mesh of the player and the collision mesh of the crate, then that will trigger an event. So that might be, for example, if you had a key object. I don't have one to hand, but if you made a 3D model of a key, well, let's say, for example, this bonsai tree, if we scaled it down a bit, where's the... Oh, I've got to place it first and then select it. If we said 0.5, there we go. So let's say we had a really small bonsai tree like that. You could set this as a, select it, character collides, and then you'd have a script that maybe makes this disappear and adds a bonsai tree to your inventory. And then that way, when you walk over it, as soon as you bump into it, you'll essentially pick it up, right? That sort of thing is what character collides can be used for, okay? So those are the two events that are sort of standard for an object. But objects can also be made into a couple of extra things. First of all, an item container. We could turn this crate into an item container so it actually has things in it, like a chest. So if we turn this on, this would be where you'd put your items. So I could put a sword in there, for example, and how many swords are in there, okay? But more importantly, the reason why I bring this up is because this has a couple of events as well, on open and on close. And they should be pretty self-explanatory. Every time you open this container, if it's a container, it will run a script. And every time you close this container when you're done with it, it will run an assigned script. So if you want to assign anything to an event like that, this is where you would do that. We can also turn an object into a vehicle by pressing the vehicle on button. Doesn't make sense for a crate to be a vehicle, but if this was a model of a car or a boat, then we've now made a vehicle, okay? And vehicles have a couple of events, embark and disembark. And again, should be pretty self-explanatory. Every time you get into the vehicle, it triggers the embark event. And if you have a script on that, that will be triggered. And every time you disembark, that's a disembark event. Every time you get out of the vehicle, and you can assign a script to that as well. So, for example, let's say you wanted your armor on your character to go up when you're inside a vehicle. You could have a script on your embark script that increases your armor value by 10 or something. And then when you get out of the vehicle, you'd have a script that puts it back to what it was before. Something like that, right? I'm not saying you would actually do these things. They're just examples to sort of give you an idea of what you might use these things kind of for. Okay? It's up to you to sort of, work out the kind of game you want to make and how you want to use these things. So that's objects. And then the last thing to talk about in terms of the assets is characters, because characters can have events as well. So let's select Justin. And we have 4 events here in the behavior settings where we can assign scripts. When player interacts, that's a bit like an object. If the player character walks up to Justin and clicks on him, that would be an event. If it's assigned, your script will do something. When next to player is when you're standing on a tile either in front, behind, or to the left or right of Justin, in this case. That would trigger the when next to player event, and you can have a script on that event. So you would say run script and trigger the script. When player collides is like the bonsai tree. It's when the 2 collision meshes of both the player and the other NPC collide. It triggers an event, and you can have a script do something. And on death should be self-explanatory. It's when this character dies, when their HP is reduced to 0, it triggers an on-death event, and if you have a script on that event, then that's when it will be triggered. So, for example, if you wanted a boss to be killed and then you want a quest to be completed the moment the boss is killed, you would have a script that completes the quest, and that would go in your on-death event of your boss monster, for example. So those are your character events. There's only 4, but they're quite useful to know. And then maps themselves have events as well. If you don't have anything selected, the map itself has a few events. Preload and postload events. These are for the loading of the map. Preload is before the map loads, so if you wanted something to happen before you actually see your map. And postload is after everything has loaded. So when the map's loaded and all of the assets that are on it, like characters and objects, as soon as it's finished loading, it then runs this event. And if you have a script on that event, that's when your script is triggered. Zones can have scripts. So if we add a zone, we can choose a passable or an impassable zone. Depending on which one you pick, has different events. So let's start with passable, and we'll just call this test 1. So here's a passable zone called test 1, and it can be triggered on a couple of events. When any character enters it, any character exits it, when a character interacts with it, and if an object enters or exits it. So these should be pretty self-explanatory now. They're kind of the same as the tiles. So anytime any character enters this zone, now it's important to point out that the zone comes in by default tile size, but it can be much bigger than that. We can say 32 by 32. Okay, so now we've got a much wider net. And anytime any character enters this zone, that would be an event for a script to trigger. Or anytime any character exits this zone, that would be an event. And we have interacts. So if a character interacts with this zone in any way, clicks on it, that would be an event. Or if you push an object into this zone, that would be an event. Or if you push an object out of a zone that it's in, that would be an event. Okay? So those are zones, or at least those are passable zones that you can go inside. If we add a impassable zone, these are zones that you can't enter. They'll actually block you from entering. And if you're inside, you can't get out. I think that's how it works anyway. I'm not sure about when you're inside it, but certainly if you're outside, you can't get in. If there's a chance if you're inside, you'll probably be pushed out. I'm not sure. But either way, you're not supposed to be able to go into them. They're obstructable zones. And they only have one event. Oh no, they have 2. I stand corrected. But the main one is character collides. So as soon as your character bumps into it, that would be an event. Or any character, bumps into it. That would be an event. And if you had a script on that, it would then trigger. or you have interacts, which is the same as the passable zone. If you click on it, it will do something. Okay, so those are zones. They can be useful. And then I'm not going to go into this in any great detail right now because I've got it planned for this series anyway. This is the event scheduler, and basically you can add a series of different events at your own custom time and have scripts run at different times. So this can be useful for day and night cycles, but it can also be used for repeating scripts and things like that. So having things happen over and over again at certain periods of time. So we'll go over that actually in this series. So I'm not going to go into any great detail right now, other than just to show you that's another event. Okay. So next we have widgets. So let's just save the map. Go to the UI editor and go to widgets. So widgets are basically user interface designed elements. So you can make menus and buttons and things for your games. So widgets, which is this main window here, the My Widget thing, this has an event called an onClose script. So whenever you close this widget, it would be an event and you can have a script run. So whenever you close your custom widget, something can happen. Okay. And then in regards to the elements that you can have on a widget, these are the elements here. The only one that has a scriptable event on it is a button. So if you select the button and go to properties, the button action can be close widget or craft items. So refer to the crafting video to know how to do that. But specifically for this video, run script and then choose the script you want it to run. That would be how you make a button click event for your games. So if you wanted a user interface where you click a button and something happens, that's how you do it. You'd make a widget, put a button on it, and make sure it's a run script event, and then you'd write the script and assign it to that button. So that's widgets, pretty quickly covered. Items. So if we move to the items editor, items have a few events they can have. First of all, if an item is usable or consumable, so I'll just enable it for the sword, even though it doesn't make any sense. But if it's on, then you can assign a script to the moment you use that item. So for example, if you wanted to make a poison apple, you would make a script that kills the player or does damage or something. That would go into the usable consumable script event. And then when you use that item, when it's consumed or just used, it could be a key, for example, on a door. The moment you use that item, that script is run. Okay. If it's an equipable item like the sword, you've got a couple of events for when you equip or unequip it. Should be self-explanatory. So when you hold the sword, when you put the sword into your hand, an event is triggered and a script can be run. And when you take the sword out of your hand, that would be an unequip script event. And if you have a script on that, that would be when it's triggered. So every time, and it's important to point out, this is just for this item. So it's not generic. It's not every time any item is equipped. You have to set it per item. Okay. So when you equip this sword, this script is run. When you unequip this sword, this script is run if you assign it. Okay. Equipable weapons also have an on-hit event. Self-explanatory. When this weapon hits an enemy or anything, it's considered an on-hit event, and then you can have a script run in that moment. If it's not a equipable weapon, but it's a projectile, projectiles have their own hit event as well. Same thing, but this time it's a projectile that's flying across the map. When it hits something, it would be an event, and you can have a script there. So if you want a missile to do extra damage or trigger an explosion effect when it hits something, your script would play the effect on the hit. Yeah. Tool item is in relation to the tools, as I said earlier, where you can make a pickaxe or an axe or something like that. This would be where you would say, what's the script that you would use for that tool. Okay, what happens when you use this tool, for example, on a rock. So that would be where you would set that. So those are items. Those are all the scripting events that you have for items. Quests is next. So we just quickly add one. There's a couple here, completion and failure. Now these are different to the ones in the global events. because these were for just every time any quest is completed or failed. This is for just this specific one. So if you want something specific to happen when this quest completes, that would be the event for it. And likewise, the failure event for this quest. Should be pretty self-explanatory for that. So just so it's super duper clear, I'll give you an example. So this one, quest completed, if you wanted a message to pop up every time any quest is completed, this would be the script that has a message pop up. But if you wanted an item to be given to the player when they complete a particular quest, this would be the event to put that script on, okay? Because otherwise, if you put it on the other event, they get that item multiple times every time they complete any quest. Whereas this one is just for this specific quest. Then we've got the Combat tab. And this has, this is for tactical turn-based and menu-driven turn-based battles. We have all these events here. They should be pretty self-explanatory, but I'll just quickly go over them. Pre-battle is when the map is loading before the battle starts. That's an event where you can have a script happen when you're sort of getting ready for battle. Pre-round is before the next round begins. So just to be clear, a round is when everybody's taken their turn and it's going round to the first person again. So before the first person takes their turn again, this would be the event when that script is triggered. Pre-turn is before any person's turn. So if I make a turn, just before it goes to the next person's, that's when this event will happen. They'll then make their turn, and then just before it goes to the next person's turn after that, again, this script will run. Okay, so before any person's turn. This is after the battle, so post-battle. So when the battle's ended, this will be the event triggered for that, and you can have a script run then. And these are very similar to these two, but they're just at the end of each. So this is before each round, this is at the end of each round, and this is at the end of each turn. So they basically kind of functionally trigger at the same time. You wouldn't really perceive much of a difference depending on which one you used. But it's just important to understand that chronologically, this one will trigger before this one. Because when it's the end of your turn, it will then trigger this event. And then before it's the next person's turn, then it will trigger this event. So you sort of think about it in that way. So if you had two scripts assigned, different scripts assigned to this event and that event, this one would trigger and then this one would trigger. Okay. But I just mentioned that. Then we've got a couple of events for battles themselves. They can have a victory script and a defeat script. Self-explanatory. If you win the battle, that's an event. If you lose the battle, that's an event. Now, it should be pointed out the difference between victory, defeat, and post-battle. This is victory or defeat irrelevant. This will trigger regardless. So if you lose the battle, this will still trigger. If you win the battle, this will still trigger. This is just post-battle. When the battle has ended, regardless of how it ended, this will trigger. Whereas these will only trigger in the event of either a victory, you would use this one, or a defeat, you'd use that one. Okay? And then the only other one in here is the spawner. If you set up a spawner, we'll just type something random there. If you set up a spawner, then you have the ability to use a spawn script. So if you set up, for example, a set of tiles in your map that keeps spawning, for example, chickens over and over again, then every time a chicken spawns, there'll be a spawn event. So every time a chicken spawns, it will run this event. And if you have a script assigned, it will run your script. So every time a chicken spawns, a script can be run. Okay. So the last one to talk about, and we've got to the end of all the events, is in the Stats tab, Skills. So skills can have a script added to them by clicking this particular button here, not the Add Effects button, but the Add Script button. And this basically allows you to add a custom script to a skill, so you can make a skill do something custom. So if you want a skill that does something beyond what's built in the effects. You want, for example, a skill that makes your character bigger, then you'd have a script that makes your character bigger, and then you'd place that script into your effects list here using the add script button. And now every time you use your custom skill, it will trigger your script. Okay, so skills can be a trigger event as well for scripts. And that brings us to the end of what I believe, I think I've gone through this program with a fine-tooth comb trying to find all the different events. I believe that's all the events there is in this program. So just to reiterate, now that we've gone over all of them, this is what I mean when I say that RPG in a Box is an event-based engine. So the way you make games in RPG in a Box is you write your scripts, and then you basically assign them to all the different events that I've shown you today in this video. If there isn't an event, then it won't trigger a script, okay? So the way you build your games is you write a script, and then you find the right relevant event that matches what your needs are, and then you assign that script to that event. Now, it is possible to have go slightly beyond the events that are built in, but that's very advanced, and you'd be using what are called while loops, and you typically do that in the startup script. Now, that's a bit beyond the scope of this video. I only mention it just so that you are aware that it is possible to have custom events that you can watch out for, but it's advanced because you need to know how to script, because you're going to have to go beyond the user interface. You're going to have to go beyond what RPG in a Box just offers to you out on the front end. Okay. But in terms of how RPG in a Box works, this is it. It's all a whole load of different events. You write scripts and then you assign them to those events. And that's as complicated as it is in essence to script a game in RPG in a Box. You write a script and then you assign it to an event. And that's how RPG in a Box works. So with that said, that'll wrap up this video on the scripting side of RPG in a Box. In the next video, we'll get to some actual practical logic coding so that you can start to get a sense of how to actually program a game. So with that said, that'll wrap this video up, and I'll see you in the next video.